The silence of the Vargas Rift felt endless, until High Marshal Kaylor saw the human warship waiting in the dark. It was alone. That was the first thing that bothered him. The second was that it did not run. Kaylor stood on the command deck of his flagship, Knight Sovereign, and stared at the vessel drifting ahead of his 7-ship force. The Rift was a disputed lane of space. The Thauran Dominion had started treating it like their own. Most species accepted that without a fight. Humans had not. The ship ahead looked plain and severe, built from dark metal and hard angles. No shield flare, no distress call, only a slow pulse of amber lights. Kaylor had crushed rebellions, broken fleets, and forced whole systems to bow. He had never lost a battle. To him, this should have been simple. 1 young species, 1 ship, 7 Dominion warships. A lesson. He sent a formal hail. The answer came back in a calm female voice. "This is Captain Mara Venn of the Earth warship Resolute Ash. We read your presence clearly." No fear, no apology, no begging. Kaylor narrowed his pale eyes. "You are in restricted space." "We do not recognize that claim," she replied. "We are holding position." Holding position, as if she had the right. Kaylor ordered a deep scan. He wanted their weapons, crew count, engines, and weak points before he decided whether to board them or break them. Sensor Chief Terran locked the array onto the human ship. On the Resolute Ash, Captain Mara Venn sat in her chair and listened to the quiet hum of her vessel. She had expected this. Admiral Rowan Hale had told her exactly what to do before she left Earth Command. Let them scan. Let them see enough. Make them think. Around her, the crew worked in steady silence. No shouting, no panic. 1 officer checked navigation, another reviewed weapon safety locks, a third calmly updated maintenance records, as if 7 hostile ships were not hanging beyond the hull. Mara opened a ship-wide channel. "Stay sharp and let them look." Back on the Knight Sovereign, the first results appeared. Terran frowned. He checked the calibration twice, then a third time. The scanner was working perfectly. That was the problem. "Marshal," he said quietly. Kaylor heard something in the officer's voice he almost never heard. Unease. He crossed the deck and looked down at the display. The human hull was not built from 1 armor system, or even 2. It was a woven wall of many materials locked together so tightly that the scanner struggled to separate them. Worse, the outer shell was reacting to the scan itself, absorbing energy and pushing part of it inward, almost like it was feeding on the signal. Kaylor's face stayed still, but the satisfaction he had felt earlier was gone. Behind him, the bridge had fallen silent. Outside, the Resolute Ash still drifted in the black, patient and calm, its amber lights blinking at the same slow rhythm, as if the people inside already knew what the Thauran would discover next. And for the first time in years, Kaylor felt a cold line of doubt slide down his spine. The scan had only touched the outer hull, and the next layer was about to show them something even worse. The next layer of the scan opened, and the fear on the Knight Sovereign stopped being a feeling and became math. Terran swallowed once, then moved to the internal structure report. "Marshal," he said, keeping his voice steady with effort, "their ship is divided into sealed combat sections." Kaylor's eyes stayed on the screen. Every major corridor, every engineering line, every troop space, every weapons bay inside the Resolute Ash could be locked away from the rest of the ship in seconds, not just with blast doors, with full structural isolation. If fire spread, it could be trapped. If a hull section tore open, the rest of the vessel could keep fighting. If boarding troops entered one zone, they could be buried alive inside it.
Kaylor felt his lower hands tighten behind his back. Most ships were built to survive damage. This one was built to keep killing after damage. Terran continued. There is more. He enlarged a cluster of readings around the inner walls and support frame. The materials under the outer hull are changing shape after impact. Small fractures close over time. Weak points harden. It is slow but measurable. Sub-Commander Drax, Kaylor's veteran second-in-command, stepped closer. You're saying the ship repairs itself while under pressure? In limited ways, Terran replied. Not fully, but enough to matter. Enough to matter. That phrase settled over the command deck like frost. Kaylor said nothing. He only gave a short motion for Terran to go on. The sensor chief moved to the weapons layer. For a moment, he did not speak. Then he did something Kaylor had never seen before in an active scan. He checked the result 4 times. When he finally looked up, the color had drained from his face. The primary weapons are magnetic launch cannons, heavy mass drivers, 12 main guns, secondary flank batteries. Ammunition is dense metal, probably tungsten or something close. That is not unusual, Kaylor said. No, Marshal, Terran answered. The velocity is. He placed the numbers on the main display. The bridge crew stared, then stared harder. One of the younger officers made a small sound and quickly went silent. Drax read the estimate twice. That cannot be right. Terran did not argue. I hoped it was wrong. Kaylor spoke in a low voice. Explain it simply. Terran nodded. If our scan is accurate, one shell from one of those forward cannons would hit with destructive force far beyond standard fleet weapons. If all main cannons fire together, he stopped. Marshal, a single full strike from that ship could tear apart multiple capital vessels before we could recover. No one on the deck moved. The resolute ash was still out there, still dark, still still, and now it no longer looked plain. Now it looked restrained. On the human bridge, Mara Ven watched the Thaurin ships hold formation. No weapon charge, no shield bloom, no rush forward. Good. That meant they were reading carefully. Beside her, Lieutenant Sora Lin studied the tactical display. They've stopped adjusting their attack angles. Mara gave a small nod, because they don't like what they see. Sora looked toward the view screen, toward the giant flagship hanging in the rift. Do you think they understand the message yet? Not fully, Mara said. She knew how officers like Kaylor thought. Power had given them habits. Pride had given them blindness. It took time for either one to crack. But once the crack started, it spread. Back on the Night Sovereign, Terran moved to the reactor readings. 3 core signatures: independent, redundant, balanced. He took a slow breath. Then he said the words that made even Kaylor's heartbeat change. Marshal, this ship was not sent here to survive a fight. He looked at the numbers again. It was sent here expecting one. And the next scan did not reveal fear inside the human ship. It revealed something far worse.
The words hung on the bridge like smoke. It was sent here expecting one. No one answered Terran. No one needed to. High Marshal Kaylor kept his eyes on the screen, but inside, the shape of the situation had already changed. When his fleet entered the Vargos Rift, he believed he was the hunter. Now, for the first time, he was no longer sure who had stepped into whose trap. Continue, he said. Terran obeyed at once. He moved into the life sign scan, the part of the report that usually settled things. Crew numbers, locations, stress levels, signs of panic, signs of weakness. Something useful, something normal. The display lit with human bio-readings from inside the resolute ash. Crew count confirmed, Terran said. 1,612 personnel. Drax frowned. That many on a ship of that size? Yes. Kaylor said nothing. The scan mapped the crew section by section, weapons crews at combat stations, engineers in core control, damage teams already placed near vulnerable points, medical units on standby, security squads near sealed access halls. It was not the layout of a nervous crew. It was the layout of one that had rehearsed this exact moment. Terran's fingers slowed across the controls. Kaylor noticed. "What is it?" The sensor chief's throat moved before he answered. "The stress profile." Drax leaned forward. "Explain." Terran opened the next layer and let the numbers rise across the main display. Then silence spread across the bridge. The scanner showed elevated alertness, strong focus, faster response readiness, controlled chemical output, high neural activity. But not fear. Not the kind the Dominion understood. Not the kind any warship crew should show when trapped under 7 enemy vessels. Kaylor stared at the line again. Then again. "Is the system failing?" he asked. "No, Marshal." "Then why are there no panic markers?" Terran did not answer right away, because the truth sounded wrong even to him. "There are signs of preparation," he said slowly. "There are signs of discipline, but the scan cannot match their emotional state to standard combat fear responses." Drax gave him a sharp look. "Cannot match?" Terran lowered his voice. "It does not fit the threat library." That got everyone's attention. The Dominion threat library had been built over centuries. It contained battlefield readings from dozens of species in every known state: fear, despair, rage, confusion, surrender shock, suicidal aggression. It was meant to predict reactions before they happened, and it had just failed. Terran expanded the final classification box. 2 words glowed on the display. Response: unknown. A young bridge officer whispered, "That is impossible." Kaylor heard it, but did not correct him, because it was impossible. Or it should have been. On the Resolute Ash, Captain Mara Venn stood and walked once across the bridge, calm as ever. Her crew worked with quiet hands and clear minds. Some checked instruments, some reviewed damage drills. One petty officer in the rear section was calmly arguing over a supply count. Normal things, small things, human things. Lieutenant Sora Lin watched her. "They're still scanning our crew." Mara nodded. "Let them." "You really think that helps us?" Mara stopped beside the tactical display and looked at the frozen line of Thalran warships. "Yes," she said. Sora glanced at her. "And this tells them—" Mara's eyes stayed on the enemy flagship. "It tells them what kind of people would stay here anyway." Back on the Night Sovereign, Terran pulled up the next encrypted section of the scan, one that had taken longer to pierce than the rest. His face changed before he even spoke. Kaylor saw that, and a cold pressure tightened in his chest. "What is in the lower decks?" he asked. Terran looked at the reading one more time. Then he answered. "Marshal, I think they brought something even our science corps still calls theoretical." The hidden section of the human ship was not carrying ordinary warheads, and what the scan found there made the weapons crew step back from their firing panels.
For a moment, no one on the Night Sovereign moved. The hidden section of the Resolute Ash stayed on the main display, wrapped in layers of shielding so dense and strange that even the deep scan had struggled to read through them. That alone was enough to poison the air on the bridge. Ships hid many things: fuel reserves, command archives, emergency vaults. But military vessels only protected one thing that carefully: the thing they planned to use last. Terran zoomed in on the lower deck chamber layout. The sealed storage bays sat beneath the main spine of the ship, each one locked behind separate containment fields. The energy traces around them were not familiar to any standard Dominion weapon profile. Drax broke the silence first. Missiles? Terran shook his head. No, not standard ones. Then what are they? Terran let out a slow breath. The scan suggests compact warheads, heavy containment, exotic charge structure, spatial distortion signatures. A murmur passed across the bridge. Kaylor did not turn, but he heard it. Fear always sounded different when trained soldiers tried to hide it. "Say it plainly," he ordered. Terran looked at him. "Marshal, our science directorates have written papers on weapons like this. They were judged too unstable, too difficult, and too expensive to build." Drax stared at the screen. "But the humans built them." Terran's voice grew quieter. "If the scan is correct, yes." Kaylor stepped closer to the display. "How many?" Terran checked once more, as if he hoped the number would change from one breath to the next. "It appears to be 36. 36. Not one device, not a prototype, a full carried stock." Kaylor felt the floor under his feet, steady and cold, while the inside of his mind shifted hard enough to make the room feel different. A human ship had entered a disputed corridor alone, carrying weapons that the Dominion had only argued about in theory. And they had allowed the scan. That was the part he could not escape. The humans had not been caught with this. They had revealed it. Not every detail, not everything, but enough. Enough to make sure he understood. On the lower weapons deck of the Night Sovereign, Firing Officer Relk received the updated threat summary. He read it in silence. Then he looked through the tactical feed at the dark shape of the Resolute Ash. He had spent his whole career waiting for the order to fire before the other side did. That had always been the safe rule. Today, it no longer felt safe. He took one slow step back from the firing controls. No one told him to. He just did it. On the human ship, Captain Mara Venn stood with both hands resting lightly behind her as the bridge lights glowed dim and steady around her. She could feel the shift out there without hearing a single Thalring word. Ships had a language of their own. Attack posture, shield pressure, weapon heat, flight correction. The enemy formation had gone still in a new way. Not the stillness of patience, the stillness of thought. Lieutenant Sora Lin looked up from her panel. "They know now." Mara said, "Part of it." Sora gave a faint, uneasy smile. "And they still don't know what we kept hidden." Mara's face did not change. "That," she said softly, "is the whole point." Back on the Night Sovereign, Terran moved to the final analysis block attached to the hidden armory. His hands almost stopped when the estimate finished building. Kaylor saw his expression. Another number, another piece of bad news. "What now?" the Marshal asked. Terran stared at the line, then answered in a voice that sounded smaller than before. "Marshal, if even one of those warheads works the way the scan predicts—" He stopped. Kaylor's eyes narrowed. "Finish it." Terran did. "Then that human ship is not here to win a battle." He looked up. "It is here to erase one." And when Kaylor finally asked for everything the Dominion had on humanity, the truth was even worse than the scan.
Kaylor did not look away from the screen. "That human ship is not here to win a battle. It is here to erase one." Terran's words stayed in the air. No one challenged them. The silence on the Night Sovereign was no longer the silence of confidence. It was the silence of officers realizing they had walked into a situation already understood by the other side. Kaylor turned at last. "Bring me everything we have on humanity," he said. His intelligence officer, Sel Varys, was already moving before he finished. She was quick, sharp, and quiet, the kind of officer people forgot was in the room until the room badly needed her. Within minutes, she pulled the Dominion's full human file onto the central display. Kaylor expected something thin.
Young species rarely had deep records. What appeared instead was not thin, it was neglected, and that was worse. Cell opened the history section first. Estimated human civilization age, she said, roughly 10,000 years. Drax frowned. That is older than several council states. Yes, Cell replied. Kaelor stood still. 10,000 years. Not 10,000 years of peace. 10,000 years of struggle. The file rolled forward. Kingdom wars, civil wars, faith wars, empire wars, resource wars, machine wars, world wars, cold wars, proxy wars. They fought over land, over water, over trade, over beliefs, over fear, over pride, over things too small to matter and things too large to share. And still they did not die out. Cell kept reading. At one point, they created enough planet-killing weapons to destroy themselves many times over. A low murmur crossed the bridge. They used them? Drax asked. Some, Cell said, not all, but they lived for generations with extinction resting on their own hands. Kaelor felt a strange weight form inside his chest. He had studied defeated species before. Their histories usually broke in familiar places. Collapse, fragmentation, retreat, decline. Humans had reached the edge again and again and kept going. Cell switched to the military section. This is where our file becomes weak, she said carefully. Kaelor's eyes sharpened. How weak? The last full Dominion assessment is 11 years old. That landed badly. Drax turned. 11? Cell nodded once. At the time, humanity was judged ambitious but manageable, technologically behind, militarily growing but not urgent. Kaelor said nothing. 11 years. Enough time for a dangerous species to become something else entirely. Cell opened the next section. Known production line, Ashgard-class warships. The bridge officers watched as the designation appeared under the image of the resolute Ash. Current confirmed hull numbers? Kaelor asked. Cell read the line once, then again. Minimum confirmed count, she said. 381 vessels. Drax stared at her. 381 ships like that? Minimum, Cell repeated. Production likely ongoing. Kaelor turned back toward the viewport. The lone dark ship still drifted in the Vargos Rift, calm and unhurried. One vessel, and behind it at least hundreds more. A slow, ugly thought began to settle in his mind. This might not even be one of their best ships. As if hearing that thought, Cell spoke again. There are higher classifications above Ashgard in intercepted human records. We have names for some, no reliable data on capability. Kaelor's expression did not change, but inside, the truth locked into place. The resolute Ash had not come here to bluff. It had come here to be measured, and humanity had chosen exactly how much fear to place in Thalren hands. Then Cell opened the final section of the file, and Kaelor learned the most dangerous thing about humanity was not their weapons, but what danger had turned them into.
Cell opened the final section of the file. The bridge lights reflected across the display as lines of analysis moved into place. Combat records, psychological notes, first contact reports, fragments from intercepted human military briefings, old diplomatic observations from species that had dealt with Earth long before the Thalren had paid attention. Kaelor read the first line, then the second, and slowly the shape of the real danger came into focus. Human military behavior under extreme threat, Cell said, shows abnormal stability. Drax looked over at her. Define abnormal. Cell did not hesitate. They do not break the way most species do. The words were simple. That made them worse. She kept reading. Repeated records show that human crews under siege, encirclement, deep isolation, or near certain death do not always display collapse responses.
In many cases, pressure appears to sharpen decision-making rather than destroy it. No one on the Night Sovereign spoke. Kaler remembered the scan, the missing panic markers, the unknown classification, the cold silence on the bridge when the result first appeared. Now it had context. Now it had history behind it. Cell moved to the next block. Observed pattern. The human species has spent a large part of its own history living under systems of danger created by itself. Long wars, civil breakdowns, weapons capable of mass destruction, repeated survival under unstable conditions. Drax said quietly, "So they adapted." Cell nodded. "That is the assessment." Kaler's eyes stayed on the display, but he was no longer only reading words. He was seeing the resolute ash again. The patient lights, the still hull, the captain who had not begged, not threatened, not postured, just held her place and let the scan happen. Not because she lacked fear, because fear no longer ruled her species the way it ruled others. Cell opened a final note from an old external observer species. The source was years old, half ignored, barely marked as important. She read it aloud. Humans are dangerous not only because they build strong weapons, but because they keep functioning after the moment most civilizations would call hopeless. The bridge stayed silent. Kaler turned toward the viewport once more. The human warship floated exactly where it had been from the start, alone, outnumbered, surrounded, and yet everything about it now felt reversed. It was not trapped, it was planted there, like a blade pushed into the table before negotiations begin, not moving, not shaking, waiting to see who understands first. On the Resolute Ash, Captain Mara then received a quiet update from comms. "No hostile movement," said Sora Lin. "No forward pressure, no weapon heat rise." Mara nodded once. "He's reading." "You sound sure." "I am." Sora studied her face. "Why?" Mara looked at the cold stars beyond the forward glass. A commander like him does not survive long by ignoring numbers, and once a certain kind of officer sees the truth, pride becomes less important than survival. Back on the Night Sovereign, Kaler finally spoke. "They knew we would scan them," he said. Cell answered, "Yes, Marshal." "They knew we would read their weapons, their structure, their crew state." "Yes." Kaler's pale eyes narrowed slightly. "And they still let us." No one answered at first, because they all knew the answer now. Terran said it in a near whisper. "They wanted this in our minds." Kaler stood very still. Yes, that was it. The strongest weapon on the human ship was not a cannon, not a hidden warhead, not even the calm crew inside it. It was the knowledge that if this was what they were willing to show, then what exactly had they chosen not to show? And once that question entered Kaler's mind, he stopped asking whether he could destroy the human ship and started asking what would come after. Once that question entered Kaler's mind, the battle in front of him changed into a calculation behind his eyes. He stepped away from the main display and walked toward the forward glass of the Night Sovereign. Beyond it, the Resolute Ash remained exactly where it had been all along, quiet, dark, patient. Its amber lights blinked in the black with almost insulting calm. Kaler stood there for several long seconds. Then he began doing the math. If he attacked first and somehow destroyed the human ship before it erased half his fleet, what came next? Cell's report had already answered that. Hundreds more ships of the same class, maybe more advanced ones behind them, and a human government now holding a perfect reason for open retaliation. Other border powers would watch. Rivals inside the region would watch. Every species that feared the Dominion would see something important. Even Kaelor had chosen to fire only after fear forced his hand. And if he simply turned away, that also had a cost. Word would spread just as fast. 7 Thalren warships entered the rift. 1 human vessel stayed still. Then the Dominion withdrew. That story would travel. Stories always did. Drax stepped beside him, keeping his voice low. "You are thinking of disengagement." Kaelor did not look at him. "I am thinking of consequences." Drax understood the difference. A lesser officer would have pushed for pride. Drax had served too long for that. He folded his arms and stared at the human ship. "If we fire, this becomes a war." Kaelor gave one slight nod. "If we leave," Drax continued, "we show weakness." "Yes." Drax was silent for a moment. "Then there is only one road left." Kaelor finally turned from the glass. There usually was, and sometimes the hardest road for a conqueror was not retreat and not attack. Sometimes it was to speak first. He walked back toward the central command deck. Every eye on the bridge followed him. Terran at sensors, Cell at intelligence, weapons officers trying not to look too tense, young crew members pretending to study their panels while waiting for history to tilt one way or the other. Kaelor stopped at communications. "Open a direct channel to the human ship," he said. No one moved for half a breath. Then the operator snapped into action. Signal lines opened, translation systems armed, audio and visual links aligned. On the Resolute Ash, the incoming request flashed across Captain Mara Ven's display. Lieutenant Sora Lin looked up immediately. "Direct hail from the flagship, audio and visual." Mara arose from her command chair, smooth and unhurried, not slow, not theatrical, just controlled. Around her, the bridge straightened. No one smiled, no one relaxed. This was the part that mattered. "Put them through," Mara said. The main screen shifted. High Marshal Kaelor appeared on the display, tall and cold-faced under the dark lights of his flagship bridge. Behind him stood officers who had seen too much in too little time. Their posture told its own story. Mara met his gaze without blinking. For the first time since entering the Vargos Rift, Kaelor was no longer deciding whether to crush the humans. He was deciding what words a man uses when he realizes the other side planned the entire silence. And when he finally spoke, his voice was level, but stripped of the certainty it once carried. "Captain Mara Ven," he said, "I believe we need to discuss why your ship came here." Mara had expected that question from the beginning, but the answer she was about to give would unsettle Kaelor even more than the scan had.
Kaelor's question hung between the two bridges. "Captain Mara Ven, I believe we need to discuss why your ship came here." Mara did not answer at once, not because she needed time, because silence mattered. On the screen, Kaelor stood perfectly still. His officers stayed behind him in careful formation, but the shape of the moment had already changed. No one was pretending this was a warning anymore. This was the opening of something else. Mara folded her hands behind her back. "We came because the Vargos Rift is open space," she said, "and because your Dominion has been acting as if it already owns it." No heat, no raised voice, just truth laid flat between them. Kaelor's eyes did not move. "The Thalren Dominion considers this corridor essential to its security. And Earth Command considers quiet expansion a kind of claim made without consent," Mara replied. "So we came to make sure that claim met resistance." On the Night Sovereign, nobody on the bridge shifted. Even the younger officers understood now that every word mattered. Kaelor asked,
With one ship? Yes. That one word seemed to land harder than a speech. Drax, standing just behind Kaler, narrowed his eyes. The answer was too calm, too clean. It carried no bluff, because bluff needed volume. This had none. Kaler continued. You're allowed a full scan, no shields, no interference, no protest. Why? Mara looked at him with the same steady face she had worn since the channel opened. Because your fleet was always going to scan us, she said, and because there was no reason to insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. A few officers on the Thalrin Bridge looked down at their stations. Kaler did not. You wanted us to see the ship. Yes. The weapons. Yes. The hidden payload. Mara paused just long enough to make him feel it. Yes. Kaler's jaw shifted by the smallest amount. And why, he asked, would any captain reveal that much to a hostile force? Mara's answer came quietly. Because the point was never the ship. That reached everyone. Even on the human bridge, a few heads lifted a little, as if the line itself carried weight. Kaler said nothing, so Mara continued. The point was the decision after the scan, she said, what your command would do once it understood what stood in front of it. Kaler's voice was even, but lower now. You expected me to hesitate. No, Mara said. I expected you to think. That answer cut deeper than an insult would have, because it gave him respect, and at the same time, it told him he had been measured too, not just his fleet, not just his weapons, him. Kaler held her gaze for several long seconds. On the human bridge, Mara could almost feel the weight of the silence spreading through the flagship on the other side. He understood now. The mission had never been about winning a fight in the rift. It had been about placing a fact inside his mind and leaving it there. One ship, one crew, one controlled show of strength. Enough to force a man like him to imagine the rest. At last, Kaler spoke again. If this is not a provocation, then tell me plainly what it is. Mara's expression did not change. It is an invitation, she said, to choose the next step carefully. That line settled over both bridges like cold metal. Kaler did not look angry now. He looked something much more dangerous than angry. He looked convinced. Then Kaler asked the one question Mara had been waiting for since before the Resolute Ash entered the rift. What exactly did humanity want in return?
The question came at last. Not sharp, not angry, just steady. What does humanity want in return? Kaler asked. On the bridge of the Resolute Ash, no one moved. Mara Venn had been waiting for that question since before her ship entered the Vargos Rift. Every hour of silence, every scan line, every measured answer had been leading here. She looked at Kaler through the open channel, her face calm, her voice even. A boundary, she said, a real one, agreed, written, and recognized by both sides. Kaler said nothing, so she continued. The rift remains open, no quiet expansion, no forced ownership by presence alone. Civilian passage remains protected, military movement is declared, not guessed, and neither side turns this corridor into a trap. Behind Kaler, a few officers exchanged small looks. This was not surrender. This was not a demand built on shouting. It was worse for them than that. It was reasonable. Reasonable demands were harder to reject than threats, because rejecting them too quickly made a leader look foolish, even to his own people. Kaler's pale eyes stayed on her. You speak as if this was always meant to end in negotiation. Mara answered without hesitation. It was always meant to end in understanding. Negotiation is what comes after that. That line settled hard on the Night Sovereign. Kaler understood what she meant.
If he had fired, the talking would have ended. If he had refused to learn, the corridor would have become a grave. The only path left now was the one she had built into the mission from the beginning. Drax stepped half a pace closer behind Kaler, saying nothing, but his posture had changed. He was no longer waiting for combat instructions. He was listening like a man trying to hear the shape of the future. Kaler finally spoke. "You ask for formal limits in a region my government already considers vital. And your government can continue to consider it vital," Mara said. "Vital space is exactly where clear borders matter most." Her tone never changed. That was what made it powerful. She was not pleading. She was not performing strength. She was simply speaking like someone whose side had already accepted the cost of being here. Kaler studied her for a long moment. The human captain did not blink. She did not look tired. She did not look proud either, just certain, the kind of certainty that came from orders understood deeply, not repeated blindly. "And if my council refuses?" he asked. The bridge of the resolute ash seemed to grow even quieter. Mara let one breath pass before she answered. "Then this becomes a different conversation." Nothing in her face changed, nothing in her voice sharpened, but every person listening understood. A different conversation meant fleets, it meant shipyards, it meant numbers far beyond the resolute ash. It meant the question Kaler had been trying not to feed since the scan ended. If this was what humanity showed on purpose, what waited behind it? Kaler felt that question again, cold and heavy. Then he gave the smallest nod. Not agreement, not yet, but acceptance of the truth standing in front of him. "I cannot decide this alone," he said. "I know. That is why I asked for a boundary, not a victory." For the first time since the channel opened, something changed in Kaler's expression. Not softness, not relief, something rarer, respect. Kaler had not come to the rift expecting to respect a human captain, but the next words out of his mouth would decide whether this ended as a treaty or the first chapter of a war.
For a long moment, High Marshal Kaler said nothing. The open channel between the Night Sovereign and the resolute ash remained clear and silent, carrying only the faint hum of two warships that had come dangerously close to deciding the future with force. Kaler stood under the cold bridge lights, looking at Captain Mara Venn as if he were weighing not just her words, but the shape of the world behind them. He had not come to the Vargos Rift expecting respect. He had come expecting obedience. Instead, he had found a human captain who had allowed herself to be scanned, had shown him enough to freeze his fleet in place, and had then asked for terms without sounding either desperate or proud. That was rare. Dangerous things were often proud. The worst ones did not need to be. At last, Kaler spoke. "If I carry this to the council," he said, "I do it knowing that many will call it weakness." Mara did not react. "Then carry it as survival." The words struck the bridge harder than either of them intended. Behind Kaler, Drax lowered his eyes for a moment, not in shame, in thought, because that was the real choice now, not victory or retreat, survival or blindness. Kaler let out a slow breath. "If I carry this to the council," he said, "I do it knowing that many will call it weakness." Mara answered at once. "No," she said, "I am asking you to tell them one human ship prevented a war before it began." That line changed something, small but real. Several Falren officers stopped looking at Mara like an enemy officer and started looking at her like a fact they would have to live with. Kaler noticed it too. He was still standing tall, still controlled, still every bit the commander who had ruled battlefields for years. But inside him, the old shape of power had cracked, not broken, cracked, and through that crack a harsher truth had entered. Strength was not only the ability to destroy. Sometimes it was the discipline to stop before destruction became the only language left. On the resolute ash, Mara remained still, though Sora Lin could see the tight line in her jaw. The captain looked calm, but Sora knew calm was not the same as ease. Mara understood exactly how much depended on the next few sentences. Kaelor finally said, "I can recommend formal talks, shared oversight of the rift, declared movement, protected transit." Mara gave one short nod. "That is a beginning. It is not an agreement." "No," she said, "but it is better than wreckage." That answer brought the faintest shift to Kaelor's face, not a smile, nothing so open, but something close to grim understanding. He looked past Mara for a second, taking in the human bridge behind her. No panic, no celebration, no one leaning back like the moment was won. They had stayed ready from the first second to the last. That, more than anything, told him what sort of people they were. Not careless, not reckless, prepared. "I will present it," he said. Mara met his gaze. "And we will remain in the rift. I assumed you would." For the first time, the truth between them sat openly on the channel. Neither side trusted the other, but both now understood the cost of pretending not to. Kaelor lifted one upper hand in a formal closing gesture. "Marshal Venn." "Marshal." The channel went dark. No one on either bridge moved right away, because everyone knew the guns were still there. They were just no longer the only thing speaking. 2 hours later, Kaelor would pull his fleet out of attack posture. But what happened after he returned home would decide whether peace in the rift was real or only borrowed time.
2 hours later, High Marshal Kaelor gave the order no one on the Night Sovereign ever thought they would hear in a moment like this. "Break attack posture," he said. The words were simple. They hit the bridge like a shockwave. Weapons officers across the 7,000 ships eased targeting locks. Shield pressure dropped from battle edge to guarded standby. Attack vectors softened. The sharp arc around the resolute ash loosened just enough to stop looking like a trap. No one celebrated. Not on the Thauren side, not on the human side, because everyone understood the same thing. This was not peace yet. It was only the first step away from disaster. On the lower weapons deck of the Night Sovereign, Officer Relk removed his hand from the firing board and stared at the tactical display. The human ship was still there, still silent, still unafraid. He had spent the entire standoff waiting for the order that would throw both fleets into fire. It never came, and somehow that unsettled him more, because now he had to live with the knowledge of what might have happened if it had. On the resolute ash, Lieutenant Sora Lin watched the Thauren ships shift their formation, not fleeing, not surrendering, just stepping back from the edge. "They're moving," she said. Captain Mara Venn remained standing near the center of the bridge, eyes fixed on the display. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Wait for the flagship." That was the real measure. The escorts could move first. That meant little. If Kaelor stayed, the danger stayed. Minutes passed, then at last the Night Sovereign rotated, slowly, deliberately, like a giant predator choosing not to pounce. A quiet breath moved across the human bridge. Not relief exactly, just the release of pressure held too long. Sora allowed herself the smallest smile. "He's leaving." Mara did not smile back. Her expression stayed hard and thoughtful. "He's going home to make an argument," she said. "And if he loses?"
Mara looked at the fading shape of the Thauran flagship. Then this corridor gets crowded. Back on the Night Sovereign, the stars stretched into streaks as the fleet prepared for transit. Kaelor stood alone near the forward glass, hands clasped behind his back, watching the human ship grow smaller. He did not feel defeated. That surprised him. He had expected anger, shame, the bitter taste of an unfinished threat. Instead, he felt something heavier, responsibility. Because now the danger was no longer in the rift. Now it was in what he would say next. When the fleet returned to Dominion space, Kaelor went straight to the High Council chamber. He did not rest, he did not change uniform. He carried the scan report, the intelligence file, and the full memory of Captain Mara Ven's calm face into the oldest hall of Thauran power. 9 counselors waited for him. Stone walls, cold light, long shadows, a room built for decisions that changed worlds. Counselor Dresk, oldest among them, looked down from the raised seat and spoke first. "You returned without firing," he said. Kaelor met his gaze. "Yes." Dresk's expression hardened. "Then explain why a single human warship was worth more than Dominion authority." Kaelor held the silence for one breath. Then he gave the only honest answer. "It was not the ship that stopped me," he said. "It was what stood behind it." And when Kaelor finally revealed what the scan had shown, the Council's anger began to turn into something far more dangerous: understanding.
"It was not the ship that stopped me," Kaelor said. "It was what stood behind it." The council chamber went still. No whispers, no angry interruption. Just 9 powerful figures staring down at the High Marshal as if they were waiting for him to say something that would restore the world they understood. He did not. Instead, Kaelor ordered the scan report opened before them. The first images rose over the chamber floor. Armor layers, internal combat sections, self-reinforcing hull structures, weapon arrays, hidden lower-deck storage. Then came the numbers, the velocity estimates, the reactor redundancy, the sealed payload signatures. Finally, the crew reading. Response: unknown. Counselor Dresk leaned forward. "Explain that." Kaelor kept his voice level. "Our threat systems could not classify the emotional state of the human crew." "Because the scan failed?" another counselor asked. "No," Kaelor said, "because the crew did not react the way known species react when facing superior force." That line changed the room. Anger had been easy. Math was harder. He continued without rushing. He told them about the intelligence file, about the age of human civilization, about 10,000 years of conflict that should have broken them again and again, but had instead sharpened them into something patient, prepared, and deeply difficult to frighten. He explained the confirmed number of ships in the same class. He explained that the vessel in the rift was not likely their finest. He explained the most important fact of all. The humans had allowed the scan. They had wanted the Dominion to see enough, not everything, enough. By the time he finished, no one in the chamber was leaning back in comfort anymore. The debate lasted for days. Some demanded a fleet buildup. Some argued the Dominion should strike before humanity grew stronger. Others, after reading the report closely, asked the harder question: strike with what certainty? Strike toward what ending? A clean victory no longer looked possible. Even a successful first attack might only open the door to a larger war the Dominion could not control. In the end, fear did not destroy the Dominion's pride. It refined it. A formal proposal was sent to Earth Command. Weeks later, representatives from both sides met on a neutral station beyond the Vargas Rift. The talks were cold at first, careful, measured, but they moved forward. Borders were discussed, transit rights were written, patrol limits were set, Monitoring stations were agreed upon. Neither side got everything it wanted. That was how Maravan knew the treaty was real. Months after the standoff, the Vargas Rift no longer felt like a trap waiting to spring. Merchant ships crossed it under shared rules. Military vessels reported movement instead of guessing at hostile intent. The danger had not vanished, it had simply been given shape. And shape was better than chaos. One evening, long after the treaty was signed, Kaelor stood again at a viewport aboard the Night Sovereign. The stars beyond the glass looked the same as they always had, cold, distant, silent. But he no longer looked at them the same way. He thought of the lone human ship holding its place in the dark. He thought of Captain Maraven reviewing routine reports while 7 enemy ships watched her. He thought of a species that had survived its worst years and entered the stars carrying both scars and discipline. Then he understood the truth in full. Humanity had not won that day by firing a shot. They had won the moment the Dominion realized that war with them would not begin with fear, it would begin with calm. And in the end, that calm did what weapons could not. It turned a battlefield into a border. The guns stayed silent, the treaty held, and the Vargas Rift became the first place where 2 dangerous powers chose understanding before destruction. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.